Hello, everybody, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day, and on this episode, I'm joined by Marc Faber, an economist, historian, and author, and publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report. We're going to discuss the state of the European economy. Is the EU on the brink of collapse? Is a color revolution currently underway in Georgia, where the current pro-EU president seemingly refuses to cede power to the so-called right-wing Georgian Dream Party that recently won the election there? We're going to talk China. We're going to talk why he's bullish on platinum and thinks it could be squeezed just like cocoa and the coffee market, and so much more. Strap yourselves in for my conversation with Marc Faber. So I want to start today with something you wrote about in your December market commentary on the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report, and that is tariffs. Trump is now going around threatening all sorts of countries with tariffs. Here's one of his recent tweets. He said, "The idea that the BRICS countries are trying to move away from the dollar while we stand by and watch is over. We require a commitment from these countries that they will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs." These kind of tariffs will only serve in hurting American citizens, damaging the US economy. Am I missing something here? And do you think this is all talk, or do you think that Trump might actually follow through on this?
My view is, in general, because I wrote my thesis for my PhD in 1969 about the financial reform of Robert Peel. And the issue in 1842 Britain was they had navigation acts and they had corn laws and a system of protectionism, which essentially increased the cost of living of the working class to benefit essentially the rich landowners and the merchants and the smugglers as well, because protectionism brings about a lot of smuggling activity. And so Robert Peel, he went and under the influence of a free trader who was influenced by Adam Smith at the time, he was Scottish, Richard Cobden, they reduced the tariffs or eliminated most of them. They abolished the corn laws, they abolished the Navigation Act, and brought England into a system of free trade, and the loss of income they had to endure because of these duties that were no longer levied was replaced by a permanent income tax at the rate of only 7% per annum, and it was levied only on a very few people in England, like 5,000 people, but no more. And that then brought essentially prices down for agricultural commodities and benefited the working class. We had essentially after 1870 in the world a deflationary environment where prices went down, but real wages went up because wages didn't go down as much as the cost of living. And so the prosperity actually increased. And tariffs in general, entire books have been written about this, and I studied this extensively. Tariffs are actually very bad for an economy. And I just like to point out that there are many economists that will say what caused the Great Depression in America in the 1930s. And this is a hotly controversial subject. But in general, people agree, even among economists, which is very unusual that economists agree on anything. But in general, they agree that obviously the Smoot-Hawley acts were not favorable, which imposed heavy tariffs on imported goods. So I'd say the idea of Trump, maybe it's just a threat, but I'd like to point out 88% of the world's population lives in emerging economies, and a large portion of that is in BRICS countries. And the mood towards the Western arrogance and kind of neo-colonialism, where Western countries meddle into the domestic affairs of developing countries such as India and China and others, I think is more or less over. And these countries, when they are threatened by someone like Mr. Trump, in my view, they will actually react and oppose these tariffs and not bend over. So the resolution among emerging economies and BRICS countries will be actually the opposite of what the arrogant American State Department thinks. They think they can threaten the world, but the world has changed and it will not let itself be threatened by what they perceive in America, which is far from perfect.
Hey guys, just a quick break to hear from today's sponsor, ARC Silver Gold Osmium. They offer personalized service and competitive prices with no minimum purchase for silver, gold, platinum, or osmium. Here's just some of the comments left on this YouTube channel about ARC SGO and owner Ian Everard. Have bought from ARC, good source and price. I cannot say enough good about Ian and his company. He is the most honest individual I could find in order to buy precious metals. If you are looking to buy precious metals, I recommend Ian at ARC Silver. He is a straight shooter. So go to arcsgo.com and contact Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. Yeah, and what shocked me more than the statement itself was actually the comments under the tweet. The amount of people saying, "That's my president. Thank God Trump is putting America first. Finally, a president that puts America first." People were exuberant. They were happy about it, little understanding that in the end, this sorts of thing is only going to hurt America.
It will increase the cost of living of ordinary people, and it will increase actually inflation. And don't think that foreign countries have no power. They have, because the US depends on some goods being manufactured in China, Vietnam, and so forth.
Absolutely. And I'd like to get your more expanded thoughts on Trump's election, what it means for the U.S. economy outside of the, speaking of tariffs, he's also been threatening Canada with tariffs. He's threatening Mexico with tariffs. He's throwing these things out there. But he claims he's going to clean up the CIA and the FBI. He claims, with Elon Musk and Vivek, that they're going to create the Department of Government Efficiency and they're going to clean up government spending and bring the debt under control. I mean, these are all big claims. How much of it is smoke and mirrors, and how much could they actually accomplish?
I mean, people have different views. I'm not very optimistic because in particular with the budget, most of the expenditures of the US are mandatory. In other words, they have to be met. Like Social Security is very difficult to cut it. Veterans benefits, Medicare, and so forth. To cut that is next to impossible. And how are you going to get re-elected if you go and tell your pensioners your pensions will be cut by 30%? So the scope actually to reduce expenditures, in my opinion, if they can cut a few $100 billion, that would be the maximum I would think is possible. The second point is that he cannot do everything himself. I mean, there is Congress. And as you know, the Democrats are mostly against him. And some Republicans are also against him. So whether he can push all these measures through, I'm not sure. And the other observation I would like to make, I knew Larry Tisch relatively well, who was the head of and the founder of Lowe's Corporation. And his brother was Preston Tish. In the 70s, Preston made the huge mistake that he wanted to do something for the community and clean up the American post office. After 1 year, he resigned. In the Greek saga Hercules, he has to clean up a stable, the dirt in a stable. And these are the tasks that Musk will be faced with to clean up the government and the unions and so forth. It's not going to be easy. I mean, I am very pessimistic about all these reforms. But let's say, even Trump is successful at everything he does. The stock market has never been more pricey, more expensive in terms of valuations than it is now. And the global economy is not in a boom phase at all. The ordinary people around the world in general, they're faced with rising prices that are going up much more than what the bullshit office called BLS is publishing. This is a lie, what they're publishing about the CPI. The CPI, in other words, the cost of living increases are much higher than what they are publishing. Same in Europe. Now, ordinary people are struggling everywhere. Otherwise, how would you explain that the number of people who can't live decently, in other words, they live paycheck to paycheck, has increased to the highest level ever in the US? How would you explain that housing affordability in the US is at the lowest in history of the US? If everything is so great, why is it? Why are housing starts so low when the population is growing and when housing price, the prices are going up? The housing starts and housing sales are poor because people don't have the money to buy them.
Absolutely. And you brought up Europe there, so I want to touch on that because you wrote in your market commentary, in Europe, economic conditions are even worse than in the US, with consumer confidence also depressed. Talk to us about what you're seeing in Europe. You know, we've heard a lot of issues plaguing Germany recently, particularly in the auto manufacturing industry, but energy costs there are skyrocketing. They're doing insane things like shutting down their nuclear power. It's kind of like almost like they're committing suicide in that sense. Is what's going on with Germany a canary in the coal mine for the rest of the EU in your view?
In my view, socialism has progressed in Europe even more than in the US. And part of the reason for this advancing socialist government is that the rich people are complacent and that they are not particularly interested, and they are also afraid. I mean, I know the leader of the AfD in Germany, the socialists on the left, they always talk about the AfD as if they were kind of Nazi followers, which is not true at all. They're just a little bit more to the right from the middle, whereas the left is not a little bit left from the middle. They're far left. You understand? There's a big difference. And for me, the AfD, and also in Switzerland, we have the SVP. In my opinion, they're not to the right enough. I mean, they're not far right. I would be personally, politically, more to the right than they are. They also have social programs and so forth, which I would not subscribe to. But some of the policies that the Europeans have introduced, not only in Germany, but also in Spain and so forth, and France, are completely against any economic principle. And I always say, we live in societies. We have to decide what do we want, how do we want to structure our society. Our society meaning the social conditions of the people. In my opinion, the top priority is to increase the standards of living of ordinary people, of everybody. The current setup, if I look at the money printing and so forth and the consequences of money printing, is that we have a society where more than 3/4 of society is being hurt by rising prices. Rising prices are commonly called inflation, but I'm careful in using the word inflation because inflation is misunderstood frequently. When prices go up for consumer goods like food and so forth, the people talk about inflation. When prices of homes go up and prices of stocks and bonds, they talk about the bull market. You understand? But the origin is both the same: money printing. And the money printing has, I mean, you should look at any statistic in any country. The money printing has created a class of people that is super rich and masses that are relatively poor. I mean, I live in Thailand. I consider myself to be reasonably affluent, but I can tell you there are lots of people in this world. They have nothing at all, not a penny. And they live. I'm sometimes surprised how they can sleep well when they know they don't have money the next day. It's amazing. But they really have nothing, nothing. And then what happened also over the last 20, 30 years in many countries, the rich, they don't need to borrow money. The only time they borrow money is to speculate because they are greedy. But poor people, if they want a car, if they want a motorcycle, even if they have an accident or so, they don't have the money to buy. They have to borrow. And then they are in the borrowing class, the class that has debts. And as interest rates went up, they're all squeezed.
I want to get your view on what some are calling a color revolution in Georgia right now. I want to read a quote from an article on BBC. Thousands of protesters returned to the streets of Tbilisi on Friday to protest against the government's decision to suspend accession talks with the European Union. Now, just as an aside here, when I heard they were suspending accession talks with the European Union, I thought that's great, but apparently there's a group of people who don't like it. So the current president is Salome Zurabishvili. I'm probably butchering her name. She said the resistance movement has begun and that she stood in solidarity with it. She says, we will remain united until Georgia achieves its goals to return to its European path and secure new elections. Now, it's interesting to note the current president was born in Paris and is a former French diplomat and is crying foul now after the so-called far right, and anything that doesn't go far left is now far right these days. The Georgian Dream Party won the recent election. This does seem to reek of foreign interference. What are your thoughts on what's happening in Georgia right now?
Well, I can tell you exactly what my thoughts are because Switzerland is also taking, I mean, the voters in Switzerland, we have a referendum. Twice they rejected the accession to the EU. They don't want to join the EU. But the socialists continuously try to go from the backside, essentially, and enter the EU, which I don't understand. We have neutrality in Switzerland, and it's been essentially proven that it's very important in the world to have a neutral state where people can get together and discuss things instead of going to war and kill millions of people for no reason at all. It could be solved through diplomacy. But nowadays, the politicians seem to have forgotten what diplomacy is. Anyway, So I'm quite familiar with the subject. And I agree with what you said. They are crazy. Anyone who wants to join the EU is nuts. Brain damage. I just got yesterday some statistics about, the richest and the poorest states in America. Which states have the highest income, like Texas or New York and so forth, and Florida, and which have the lowest incomes. I tell you, most EU countries are actually way below the US poorest states in terms of income and wealth per capita. It's amazing. The EU is a complete failure, except for one, in my opinion. You can now travel between Switzerland and Britain and Switzerland and Germany and so forth without showing your passport continuously and have long lines at immigration lines and so forth. You have now long lines at the security checkpoints.
Yeah, but that's actually a problem for people like me who aren't EU citizens because we can only stay in the EU as a total for 3 months. Normally when you visit a country with a passport, like I'm in Japan right now, I can stay here for 3 months. I could go to Korea for 3 months. I could go to Thailand for 3 months. Now in the EU, the whole thing, the whole landmass, I can only stay for 3 months within a 180-day period. So that's extraordinarily annoying. But before we hit record today, you also mentioned that you had investments in Georgia. That's very fascinating because I haven't heard that discussed very often. Where do you see, first of all, what type of investments in Georgia? How have they performed for those who have never been exposed to the Georgian market? What sort of companies, are you bullish on that market right now? Fill us in.
Maybe 15 years ago or so, a hedge fund manager that was managing funds in Eastern Europe and Russia, he talked to me about the Bank of Georgia. And then I got in touch with the Bank of Georgia and made an investment. And I have to say, it's been a very good investment since then, both in terms of the stock moving up steadily and also paying high dividends. So I still own it. I reduced the positions at some point, I think before the financial crisis, and didn't increase it anymore. But based on that experience, I then bought another bank. The Bank of Cyprus is also a hedge fund manager that told me about it. He's an American hedge fund manager based in Boston. But I listen to hedge fund managers because occasionally they have very good ideas. So I bought that bank as well, and it's been a super investment. And now I own a bank now in Kazakhstan, Halik Bank.
Wow.
HSBK is the symbol in London, LI. And I mean, it's not problem free because the majority shareholder is the previous dictator of Kazakhstan. And they're not very popular at the present time. But I think it should be okay.
Do you think it's important for investors to be looking outside of North America right now when it comes to investments, to be looking at markets like Georgia, like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, China, there's a long list, Argentina, etc. Are there opportunities today in these emerging economies? And do you think there's a danger with investors being too over-concentrated within North America?
I've just written a report, and actually the first report I wrote about this very high valuation in the US and low valuation elsewhere was in July of this year. And I wrote about major turning point in asset markets because I think that we are in a period of great turmoil with some stocks reaching major lows from where a bull market will get underway, maybe not immediately, but let's say they're phasing out, and other stocks making major tops. And among these major tops would be the FANG stocks in America, the Magnificent Seven semiconductor stocks, and so forth. And the basing stocks are more resource-oriented shares and emerging economies. The US has outperformed the rest of the world, and especially emerging economies, more than ever before. And the valuation differences are huge between the valuation of the US and valuations elsewhere. Say, one of the themes I have, and I have to give you some background, I've been known in Hong Kong as Dr. Doom because I was mostly negative about Hong Kong becoming part of China. Due to the high valuation of Hong Kong, I thought there would be an arbitrage that companies would resettle into China where land was cheap and leave Hong Kong, and that Hong Kong would become just another city in China. And so I have a clean sheet in being negative about property stocks in Hong Kong for a long time. But now, this year, I turned very positive about Hong Kong properties because the real estate companies in Hong Kong are mostly controlled by families. The families are immensely rich. I mean, billions and billions. They don't need to take any risks, or they didn't borrow much money. Most of these Hong Kong property companies have actually no debts. And they could withstand a significant decline in property prices, which I still expect to happen. But on the other hand, you know, the American media is always talking negatively about China, talking negatively about Hong Kong and so forth. But of all the cities I know in the world, Hong Kong would still be a place I would go because it's relatively free. It's like Thailand. I live in the north of Thailand, in Chiang Mai. And people talk about Thailand being a failed state. Now, this is interesting because this failed state is one of the most popular countries in the world for people to travel to and to live in. The retirees are flocking here because it's a failed state, yes, but you have a relatively high degree of freedom. So I find this very, kind of sort of dictatorial to say Thailand is a failed state. Yes, it is in terms of economic growth rates. But on the other hand, in terms of lifestyle, it's not a failed state. 2 days ago, I took an American land developer around at night. He said, Mark, I've never seen anything like this. You know, in America, they wouldn't, or in Europe, they would never let a place open with the kind of sanitary conditions we have here in Thailand. But here, everybody is reasonably healthy. It doesn't matter whether the toilet is 100% clean. I mean, you don't go into the toilet to take a bath. You just use it. And so the atmosphere for foreigners is wonderful. And I mean, now I've been driving because we had very bad floods, here in Chiang Mai.
I heard about that. Yeah.
I was sitting at my office with my feet in water up to my knees. And in my wife's house next door, we had the water up to 70 centimeters, almost a yard. And the problem was that the water stayed for about 3 days. Then the mud came in. Then we had a layer of mud like this in all my drawers, in my bookshelves, on the floor, in the garage, and in the motorcycles. 2 of my motorcycles died. They are in coma.
Wow.
And so I bought now, this is the best bike I ever had. It's a Honda CBR 1000 RR. It's like a racing bike. It's easier to drive because it's relatively light. And I don't have a number plate yet. And in 2 weeks that I'm driving around, nobody has ever stopped me because I don't have a number plate. In Switzerland, if you drove a car without a number plate, they arrest you in 5 minutes. We have a police state in Europe. We have less freedom because everything is controlled. It drives me, when I'm in Switzerland, it drives me crazy. Everything is controlled. And I always long coming back to Thailand to have my peace here.
Yeah, I feel the same way about Serbia where I live. Just the airport security experience, going through the airport security in Croatia, which is an EU country, just beside Serbia. They're asking you 20 questions. I mean, I've had so many problems with Croatian airport security, my wife too. And Serbia, they're smoking a vape in the passport control. They could care less. They just stamp your passport and send you through. It's beautiful. So I feel the same way whenever I return home to Serbia. I want to talk about platinum because this is a metal that you mentioned in your report as well. You said it could be squeezed just like cocoa and the coffee market. Walk us through what you're seeing with the platinum market and how would you play that market? Because there's only a few mining companies. I think there's some big ones in South Africa. Would you play that thesis with the miners or with the physical metal itself or some other way?
Well, the physical is like this. Historically, platinum has traded at the premium to gold and at the discount to gold. Now, the discount is essentially the largest it's ever been. The market is much smaller than the gold market and is controlled largely by South Africa and Russia. South Africa and Russia are not the closest friends of America, as you can imagine. And if they are being hurt by Western colonialist, neo-colonialist nations, I think they could easily squeeze the market. Easily. It's not a very large market. And that's why I always maintain coffee and cocoa are markets that can go ballistic because they're relatively narrow markets. So when the bull market starts in cocoa, it usually goes and becomes way overvalued. Same for coffee. Last year was the year for cocoa, this year for coffee, next year, who knows? But I think given the fact that inflation adjusted platinum is now extremely low, say as low as it was in 1970, whereas gold and silver are relatively high. They're not extremely high. And the gold market actually, given that it's been so strong, attracts little speculation. This is something that it surprises me is also the gold market is up for the first time. Gold mining shares have not participated. They're underperforming. And many fund managers are telling me, Mark, for the last 50 years, whenever the gold market went up, gold miners went up more percentage-wise, but not this time. And I keep on telling them, this is the beauty of investment markets. They're never the same. It changes.
So do you think there's an opportunity there at present? Because I've heard a lot of people talk
Yes.
about that disparity.
Yes.
We've seen some of the majors. We've seen Agnico Eagle do well. I mean, Newmont and Barrick are not doing so hot right now. And when you go further down the chain to the developers,
Yes.
especially to the explorers, these things are nowhere near performing alongside gold. So is that an area of the market that you're looking at right now?
I have a position in physical gold and some physical silver and some physical platinum. But given that gold shares and mining stocks are so cheap, I think that there is an opportunity to buy some of them like an option. If the gold price goes up further and silver and platinum go up further, like in South Africa, you have Siboney gold. Siboney is mostly about platinum. They're losing money at the present time, but if the platinum price goes up, Siboney will go up like a rocket. But I am not suggesting to your viewers and listeners to put all their money into gold mining stocks. You understand? Everything measured with moderate expectations. But I think they are cheap, very cheap. I also think, as I said, the Hong Kong shares. I think Indonesian shares are cheap. Malaysian shares are not particularly expensive. Brazilian shares, Colombian shares in Latin America are reasonably priced. Chile as well.
Very interesting. I wonder, aside from the assets we've discussed so far, emerging markets, you've mentioned some interesting countries there that weren't on my radar. Platinum, gold and silver, the gold and silver miners potentially, Hong Kong property stocks, which is another fascinating sector. Is there anywhere else right now that you're seeing value, and any assets we haven't yet discussed that you think people should have their eye on?
Well, I mentioned this Halleck Bank. I think in Europe, there are many sectors where there was value, now a little bit less. I mean, I wrote about 4 months ago that things in the world would become so bad that people would drink more and smoke again. And the tobacco stocks, subsequently, not because of me, but accidentally or coincidentally, they rose a lot. Philip Morris and Altria in America and BAT in London and Imperial Brands, they've had a superb performance given that they pay high dividends every year. And I think beverages, alcoholic beverages, there are many companies that are relatively attractive. One depressed stock until recently was Thai Beverage. I know the owner and I drink his beer. It's called Chang beer. The symbol is an elephant. I'm not doing any advertising here.
Yeah, I know
I'm
that
just
beer.
showing.
Yeah.
I mean, some people like it and some people don't like it. I like it. It's a strong beer. And and Tsingtao now in China is relatively depressed. And Diageo in London as well. And the French cognac manufacturers, Pernod Ricard and so forth, Cointreau, are reasonably priced. They're not cheap, but compared to, say, the Magnificent Seven, they're cheap. So I think these stocks have some potential because at the moment, I can observe this myself. Young people don't drink as much as I used to drink when I was young. We had drinking clubs and so forth. I mean, we were heavy drinkers, my generation. And it shows all my friends have died already. I'm a lonely man. All my friends have died. When I started to go out to nightclubs and bars, I was 16 and underage. Now people come to me and say, "Oh, we admire you that at your age you still go out drinking."
Well, that's another area of the market I hadn't considered. Tobacco stocks, you said they've already had a run, but alcohol stocks, that's definitely something to take a look at. Well, Marc, this has been a fantastic conversation. I always enjoy talking with you. Tell us about the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report, what it is you do there, and where people can find it.
I have a website called gloomboomdoom.com, all in one word, or they can find me on the Marc Faber in the internet and so on. And I mean, I sometimes feel bad because people think that I'm anti-American. I can tell you, we grew up in the 50s in Europe, the young people. Everything that was good came from America. I can assure you, the standing of America post-Second World War was at the highest you could imagine. The Americans were the good ones, the Russians the evil ones. But the world has changed. The perception of the world has changed. And ordinary people around the world, they can see especially through the social media, how the US began to intervene into other people's affairs. And it's not just about the US. 2 years ago, the British Foreign Secretary came to India and lectured the Indians about democracy. Now it happens that India has just overtaken Britain in terms of economic size. You have to see, this is psychologically a huge event, because every Indian is taught at school and in the family that India became impoverished after the colonialists came to India and controlled the system. This is not true, but this is what the mind is of Indians, that the Western country, that Britain, led to the impoverishment of India. The impoverishment of India was long in process when the British came. But I agree to some extent that the British, through protectionism, by the way, were very negative for the British economy, for the Indian economy, sorry. The British colonialists were bad for the Indian economy. That's what I wanted to say. And so the world has changed. People, when they meet Americans individually, they like them. Everybody is happy, drinking and enjoying life. But politically, the US has suffered a setback unimaginable. The prestige.
Well, some fantastic thoughts. I'm going to put a link in the description below to gloomboomdoom.com for people who want to check that out. Thank you once again, Marc, for coming on. Always enjoy your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today. This episode was brought to you by ARC Silver Gold Osmium. For all your precious metals needs, head to arcsgo.com and contact owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.